Hello everyone, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. This episode we have a lot to talk about, just like every week I feel like. We will get into the tax cuts as they make their way through Congress and some updates about what has changed both here at home and in the Middle East, and some Supreme Court rulings that came on Friday last week. So first with the tax cuts. As I told you on Monday last week, I did not believe the tax cuts were going to pass. And I didn't think they were going to be signed, or at least I didn't think they were going to be signed into law by the 4th of July. And I don't believe that anymore, and I'll explain why. The 4th of July is on Friday. It's only a couple of days away, so there's not that much time left to pass the bill. But on Monday last week, Majority Leader Thune announced the Senate will remain in session until the bill is passed. And it looks like the bill is going to pass today. And I'll describe later. I'm skeptical that it'll pass by the 4th of July deadline, but I think it will. I'm not entirely like, yes, it will, but I'm not, no, it won't either. So we've gone into the back and forth for the last few months, and so I'm going to keep it brief and keep it to the most important details. There's a rule in the Senate that the Senate can use in order to use reconciliation, and that is basically a budget bill. It allows a bill to be passed with just a majority vote. Nothing that's non-monetary can be used. Basically, senators can't put stuff in the bill that's not related. This is a good thing for the minority, and it's a bad thing for the majority. It hurt Democrats when Biden was president, and now it's hurting Republicans now that Trump is president. So what does that mean? It means a rule that Republicans were going to use to cut hundreds of billions of dollars off Medicaid, which was the plan, and that was no longer allowed to be passed. And they struck the provision out, which of course raised the cost of the bill by hundreds of billions of dollars more over 10 years. Senators like Hawley, Collins, Murkowski, Moran, and Tillis, who were concerned about the Medicaid cuts and the effects on rural hospitals, they're getting what they want. But savings will need to be offset somewhere, either by debt or by spending cuts. And they need to be aware of drawing the ire of fiscally conservative Republicans like Ron Johnson and Rand Paul. So the changes made were needed to be made quickly ahead of the 4th of July deadline. And this new plan needs to be approved by the Senate parliamentarian, and I believe it was not. But it has to get 50 votes plus J.D. Vance's tie-breaking vote, and then head to the House because it will need to be approved there. On Saturday, just a couple of days ago, they started the initial vote to get the bill passed, and it passed 53 to 47. And then Democrats and Republicans got the chance to add amendments. There's no amendments I know of that passed, but then as I said, it passed, and then Democrats forced the Senate to read the entire bill out loud, and it's a 940-page monstrosity. It took 16 hours to read the bill. The bill was actually a foot high. Imagine a foot high of stack of papers, and it went long into the night, and passage is expected sometime today. So here's what I gathered, some of the big important changes. As I said, it's a 940-page mega bill. It was released Friday night last week, and there has been some changes. Apparently, rumor has it there was a deal with House Republicans over the SALT limit, which was probably the biggest bone to pick with them, some of the moderate Republicans, and that was probably the biggest reason the bill wouldn't have passed, the original one, wouldn't have passed in the House. The SALT cap will be at $40,000 for 5 years before snapping back to $10,000, and it would rise 1% over the next 5 years. And claiming the full cap is limited to incomes below $500,000 per year. Another part is the $25 billion in new funding for rural hospitals to mitigate the impact of Medicaid cuts. I talked about that earlier. However, Susan Collins, she wanted $100 billion, so maybe she'll still vote against the deal. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, it will cost $3.3 trillion over 10 years. And interestingly, bills that add to the debt after 10 years are not allowed, according to the Byrd Rule, which means these tax cuts, unless they're going to violate the rule of the Senate, which has been in place for decades, they either need to, this bill is going to be struck down entirely, or the Senate is going to have to agree to extend the tax cuts only until the middle of next decade. Either way, this is an insane plan, and we cannot afford this, and I've said this the entire time this bill has been considered. There's also cuts to electric vehicles and green energy subsidies. There was a plan to sell 1.2 million acres of federal land for housing and community development, whatever that means. But where most of the land was on the West Coast, but I say was because it was pulled, and that's not happening. And this bill will also slash billions of dollars from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and food stamps. It will also raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, which we are projected to hit in August. No matter what, Rand Paul and Thom Tillis, they will vote against the bill because they voted against it procedurally. As for Tillis, he's not running again. He literally announced that right after he voted no, and Trump said that they should remove him from office through a primary. So he's bulletproof. There's nothing that Trump can do against him. Murkowski from Alaska she was not able to get a provision to keep funding to Alaska hospitals, which means that she may vote no too. So that's two definite no's, three potential no's, and it only takes 1 to 2 more. Just 4 Republicans have to join with the Democrats to bring down the bill. And will it be given final passage? I think the chances are decently high, but I remain skeptical. And you'll probably know, because by the time this episode comes out, it might have already passed. Anyway, moving on. In the Senate, Democrats attempted to pass a war powers resolution, but it failed 53 to 47. And this would have limited the president's authority to take unilateral action against Iran. The only Republican who voted for it was Rand Paul. He joined all but one of the Democrats, John Fetterman, who voted against it. Lindsey Graham, a warmonger himself, he's one of my least favorite Senate Republicans. He's never found a country he doesn't want to go to war with. He has said that this would have been a disaster, and of course I disagree with Lindsey. He argues that Congress can cut off military funding if it doesn't approve of what the president is doing. Yet here's the flaw with that. Congress never cuts off military funding. Never. I can't think of a year that Congress has cut off military funding. Speaking of military funding, you might be wondering, what happened to the war with Iran? Well, it seems to have cooled off significantly. Global oil prices returned to the levels it was just before the conflict started, around $66 a barrel. It had reached a high of 77. So after the strikes, Iran struck at a military base in Qatar, and literally almost right after the last episode came out, and I did suggest at that episode that U.S. military bases in the region were at risk. Apparently, though, Iran had warned us in advance, for some reason, and of the strikes, and it was just a show of force, probably for the people of Iran, so they could say, like, hey, we're strong, like, we're this big, strong, powerful country, we beat the U.S., and that's exactly what the dictator Ali Khamenei said. He said the country had delivered a, quote, slap in the face to the United States, and he made a bunch of threats against us in Israel. So, basically, even though I disapproved of the strikes and the war in general, basically proving that destroying their nuclear capability was a good idea. And speaking of destroying the nuclear capability, has the nuclear capability been completely obliterated, as the president said? That's a great question. And I've been reading a lot of different things from different people. The president and members of his administration say yes, but there are reports that Iran was relocating, and satellite images Iran was relocating some of the materials via truck before the U.S. strikes. And this was as a consequence of Trump saying that he would take 2 weeks to figure out if he was going to attack Iran. And of course, taking time to make a decision is great and all, and I totally support that. But one of the downsides with that is it gave Iran enough time to move some of their materials out of the blast zone. The UN's watchdog said the damage to nuclear facilities is very, very, very considerable. And that's their words. But what I find interesting is they said that the program could be back up and running in just a couple of months. So here's my take, and I obviously don't have any inside knowledge of the Iranian government. I'm not, an Iranian spy. I don't know anything about that. But what I'm thinking is that there was quite a bit of damage done. And I'm thinking it's unlikely it was completely obliterated, as Trump said. But I'm thinking we set them back a couple of years. And I'm guessing that they're going to try to get a bomb again, probably within the next 5 years. I would think by the end of the decade, maybe a little bit after. Just my guess. For now, it seems that the things have simmered down in the Middle East, and we'll see if it stays this way. It seems like every week something changes, so we'll have to see. And who knows, it's the Middle East, so I'm sure something will flare up again. Okay, one more thing about the Middle East, and and I think it's important, and it's Israel's domestic agenda. So the Likud party, that's Benjamin Netanyahu's party. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Likud. It's Likud. And his party is leading in the polls, but is expected to lose 10 out of the 121 seats in the Israeli Knesset. His poll numbers so far are about the same as when this brief little war began. So I don't know what to expect, because the full picture will be clear in a couple of weeks. However, what I think is pretty evident is that the governing coalition is not going to survive the next election. While Netanyahu's party is narrowly ahead, the opposition bloc, as of now, if they are able to unite, and they can bring down the government after the next election, if the poll numbers that I've seen are replicated in the next election. And that is due by the end of next year at the very latest. So far polling shows the government would win between 48 and 50 seats, while the opposition would win 64 to 67 seats. This means Netanyahu, I expect him to get more and more desperate over the next 14 months as he tries to find a way to remain in power. This is not a conspiracy. The BBC has reported 49% of Israelis believe that Netanyahu is keeping the war going for political purposes. So I'm pretty sure if half of your own country, believes that you're doing something for political purposes, it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. This, of course, it comes as he's facing corruption charges, and he's supposed to testify this week. Major rulings came down from the Supreme Court on Friday, and usually rulings come at the end of June, like the Dobbs decision came 3 years ago, and one of them was striking down an injunction that would have prevented the administration from ending birthright citizenship. Now, what does this mean, you might be wondering? How did the courts officially end birthright citizenship? Well, no. The story is President Trump signed an executive order in January, and I talked about it way back then, and now the court is basically removing the hold that were from lower courts that were blocking it. So what does this mean? Well, Justice Barrett, who wrote for the majority, said when a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, she wrote for the minority, she said the ruling was a travesty for the rule of law and an open invitation to bypass the Constitution. As for my take, I tend to agree with the minority here. While birthright citizenship needs to end, I don't think stopping lower courts from issuing nationwide things is right. It will open the door for the next Democratic administration to reverse the decision and also water down other amendments like the Second Amendment. But this does not rule on the legality of the administration's order. That is not up at stake here. Instead, it will significantly limit the power of federal injunctions, which means that a federal court in a state will have much more limited power to affect the whole nation. So if there's a court in Mississippi, that they are not able to make a court order for the rest of the country. And I think most people would normally agree with that. And that's something I tend to agree with, but at the same time, I'm not sure if this ruling was a good idea, as I explained. Since a federal injunction originally blocked the plan, I would think that would mean that the injunction has been lifted. So does that mean that birthright citizenship is over? Well, no. NBC News wrote in an article that I'll link below, is that individual lawsuits can continue in different states. So we'll have to wait and see. I have to learn more about it. I don't know. I'm not a legal expert. This is not my area of expertise, but this is from what I have gathered. The Supreme Court, there's been many wins for conservatives. The Supreme Court also ruled in favor of parents who wanted to opt their elementary-aged children out of LGBTQ-themed books in class. Good idea. It also ruled in favor of a Texas law that imposes age limits on websites. Another good idea. The Supreme Court delayed a decision on a Louisiana congressional map and whether it's unlawful, and it will hear arguments again at a later date. Another good idea. But hopefully they get to that soon, because the midterms will involve redrawing the districts. In this, if it went through, it would likely help Democrats, since many of the districts in Louisiana are Republican. Now, if you're a liberal, there are some wins for you, too. There was a provision of the Affordable Care Act that was upheld 6-3. 3 of the conservative justices joined the liberal ones to uphold it, and it would it was determining whether a preventative service would be available under Americans under the Affordable Care Act, overturning a lower court's decision. And additionally, a court ruled that a multi-billion-dollar fund to expand telephone and broadcast services can remain in place. It's known as the Universal Service Fund. I've never heard of this before. And the liberal justices, 3 of the liberals, which is all of them, and the 3 conservative justices upheld it. It's a surcharge on everyone else's phone bill that goes to lower-income households, schools, libraries, and internet service providers in rural areas. I'm opposed to this, but I support the ruling. The court ruled the FCC didn't violate the non-delegation doctrine, which basically is that an independent federal agency lawmaking doing the work of the legislature instead of Congress. The court ruled that that was not happening. And their new term will start on October the 6th, and rulings will come from that. Beginning in that term will come in June next year in 2026. However, and if an emergency case comes up, which I wouldn't be surprised if there is one under this administration, they can come back sooner. So what comes next? Well, we'll have to wait and see. By this time next week, we will definitely know if the tax cutting bill has passed through Congress. We'll definitely, by the 4th of July deadline. Another busy week in politics wrapped up. Even with the 4th of July this week, I still imagine there's going to be a lot of news, and next week we'll have another busy week. Even if it doesn't pass, there's still a whole another month before Congress goes on its summer recess. And one more thing, I've talked about this before, but I have a little project that I've been working on the last few weeks, and I will be unveiling that sometime in the month of July. I have not decided the date yet, and it will be toward the end of the month. And I'm excited about it. I hope you're interested in learning more about it in a future episode. So thank you for listening, and as always, please have a great holiday. I hope you do. And as always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will answer them best I can. Thank you for listening, and bye-bye.